Hello, hello, hello. I'm Dahlia.
And I'm Allie.
And welcome to Navigate the Now.
Welcome.
Welcome, welcome. Today's episode is extra special because we are joined by our very first guest, Mónica Espitia.
Woohoo!
Mónica is a Colombian-born journalist with a background in political reporting and years of experience in audio production. In this episode, we dive into everything from listening to your body and managing stress to finding common ground in conversations with people who hold different political views. So we're super excited to have you listen in on this incredible conversation.
And if you are enjoying our content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. We are available on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and Amazon. And we are also over on Instagram at navigatethenow, just like our podcast title. And you can also find us at navigatethenow@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions, any feedback.
Enjoy the episode.
Yes, enjoy.
Welcome to today's podcast. This is Dahlia. And
this is Allie.
We are super excited because today we have our first guest.
Woohoo! Yay!
Welcome to the studio, Mónica Espitia. She is a Colombian-born journalist with a background in studio production and political reporting. Mm-hmm. She's currently working as a multimedia producer at the Wall Street Journal.
Where she
produces several political...
No biggie.
No big deal.
No biggie.
Actually a big deal. Actually a real big deal.
Yes.
She produces several political analysis podcasts. She's also the founder and former executive producer of the Spanish language podcast Pulso y Péndulo, which was created with the mission to help bridge the current political divide in the U.S. She also helped produce the nightly political show Inside City Hall for New York One. So all my New Yorkers out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about, the New York One channel. All right. Yes. Well, welcome, Mónica.
Hi. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for coming on.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I want to shout out to Anoli. She's a mutual friend of ours, and that's how I first met Mónica. Oh, Mónica, I also wanted to tell you, I was telling my sister Iris about your Spanish language podcast. She listens to it.
Oh my God, really? Oh, yeah. Wow. That makes me so happy.
She's like, oh my God, I didn't know that.
Nice. I just checked out the episode with Angel Colina, the comedian, because I've seen him, and I love him. So that was a good episode. So
yeah, that's a great episode. Yeah, we worked on it for months to try to coordinate with him. Yeah, because he travels a lot.
Yeah,
from the beginning he was like, yeah, let's do it, but then it was a little difficult to coordinate, the time and stuff. But we're very happy we were able to do it.
Yeah, that's super cool.
And so we invited Mónica on. I think she's the perfect first guest to have with her experience in podcasting and in the political world, coming with a very unique experience, a very unique view. Mm-hmm. And also we're going to focus later on, because, we're about those tools and those toolboxes. We're going to focus on how to manage difficult conversations with people that have a completely different viewpoint, political viewpoint than you. But before we get there, Mónica, tell us a little bit more about you. Tell us about your background, what shaped you, whatever you want to share about Mónica.
Oh, wow.
The floor is yours.
Well, no pressure.
No pressure.
As you mentioned in my intro, I am from Colombia. I was born and raised in Bogota. And you asked what shaped me. I think one of the things that shaped me from a very young age was that unfortunately Colombia is a very unequal society. There's a lot of poverty. And I think that's something that I was always very aware of. And especially how that inequality sort of kind of in many ways determines the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And it's only in very few cases where people can sort of drastically change the course of their lives if they grew up in poverty, right? So that's something that I've always thought about. I think growing up in a context like that, it really reminds you of just not wasting the opportunities that come at you, and really just it grounds you and it keeps you humble in many ways.
No, absolutely. I can only imagine. And so you born and raised in Colombia. At what age did you come to the States?
Well, I moved here when I was 17 years old. I moved to the U.S. For college. I went to college in North Carolina, and then I was there for 4 years. I went to North Carolina because I got a tennis scholarship.
Tennis scholarship?
Yeah.
Oh,
So
wow.
Also a professional tennis player on our hands?
Well, not professional, but college level. I played there for 4 years. And then after I graduated, I decided that I needed more schooling. I've always been kind of a nerd. So I decided to move to New York to do a master's in international journalism. And that's how I ended up here in New York. And I quickly fell in love with the city, with how vibrant it is, how diverse it is. And I just kind of felt that this was the place for me, and I was going to try to figure out a way to stay. So here I am, 10 years later.
You said 10 years later?
Yeah, I've been in New York for 10 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be 10 years in August.
I think the rule is after you've been in New York for 10 years, you're officially a New Yorker.
Exactly. So I'm a few months away from being an official New Yorker.
Oh.
Awesome.
Can walk us through your journey, your diagnosis journey that you said also has shaped the way how you move through the world?
Oh, yeah. It definitely, it shaped me in many ways. Many of them positive, though. So where do I start this story? Ever since I can remember, I've always dealt with dizziness and just balance problems. But I never really paid too much attention to it until college. It was my senior in college. I had a vertigo episode that lasted about 3 months. It just would not go away. And like I mentioned before, I was a tennis player. So, I was training every day, traveling a lot. Just like whenever I was not playing tennis, I was in class or studying. So it was very demanding. And as you could imagine, being dizzy for 3 months was not part of the plan.
Right.
And, especially playing tennis is like I could not properly see the ball.
I would say that's not conducive to being a college athlete.
Yeah, it's just I had to stop playing for a couple of months, and obviously my coach was not happy about it. My teammates were not happy about it. But then it just kind of went away, and I forgot about it for a while. And then flash forward to 2021. At the time, I was working for New York One. I was one of the producers at Inside City Hall. And again, very demanding job. I was spending 12, 13 hours in the control room sometimes, especially during the election season. And, if you've seen control rooms maybe on TV, in a movie or a TV show, well, there's 1,000 screens in front of you. It's a very dark room with 1 million screens. You are listening to multiple sources at the same time. I had another very bad vertigo episode. And one morning, I think back then I was still working from home because we were recovering from the pandemic. I can't remember exactly if it was I think I was going to the office some days and staying home some other days. And then one morning I was in my apartment. I went for a run. And when I came back to the apartment, I was making breakfast and I fell on the floor of my kitchen.
Oh, wow.
Because I was that dizzy. And I was like, okay, maybe I just pushed a little too hard. Didn't think much of it. Next morning, the same thing happened. So at that point, I'm like, okay, this is a little more serious than I expected. Started going to the doctor, went to ENT doctors, everything you can imagine, until one of the doctors suggested doing an MRI because they couldn't find what was wrong with me. And the MRI showed that I have a tumor in my brain. As you can imagine, it was shocking news.
Scary times.
Yeah, it was very scary. It's not cancer or anything like that. But still, I was just kind of shocked. I was in disbelief. I just kind of in denial, really, is the word for it. It took me weeks to sort of come to terms with it. And I just didn't know what to do with that information, right? At that point. I kept going to the doctor because they didn't really know what exactly was going on and the consequences of it, because obviously depending on where the tumor is located, it can cause different problems. In my case, at the time, it was causing some disorientation, brain fog for sure. Like I said, dizziness, and just like vision problems, like some pretty wild vision problems. For instance, sometimes when I was at work, like as you can imagine, my job requires a lot of reading. And certain dates, for instance, if I was reading 1978, my brain would process it as 1987. Like it will just like switch the order of the numbers. And then I will look back at it and I'm like, wait a second, is that what I read? So obviously, like it started creating some problems at work. And also that environment where I was at, just producing breaking news for TV, just like was not good for my health. So after a few months, I had to fly to Colombia to do a bunch of exams and see a bunch of specialists there. And my neurologist was just like, you cannot keep working there, right? It's just, you're going to destroy your brain. You just, it's just not sustainable. You need to get out of there. And I had to do that. And in a way, it was a blessing in disguise because that's how I got into podcasting. At the time, I was producing Inside City Hall on top of a couple of weekly podcasts that New York One has. If you live in New York, check them out. They're great. Off Topic on Politics and You Decide with Errol Lewis. I was producing them and I realized how much I like podcasting. So after my doctor basically broke the news to me, or just, it was more of a reality check, really. Then I thought, okay, I just need to switch gears here. And I started looking for jobs that were more specifically podcasting, that were not as, I guess, like visually demanding, I will say, as producing nightly news for New York One or any other TV channel, really. So that's how my podcasting journey started. And sorry, I'm going forever here, but
no, that's okay.
The other thing I will say about this is that it also, like on a more personal level, it really changed me in many ways. I've always been very active, a little hyperactive, to be honest. And the diagnosis really forced me to just chill, to just like slow down, which I think at the time was very good for me. It's exactly what I needed. Right. Just, you don't need to be doing a million things in one day, like pushing yourself to the limit. I've always been very physically active too. Right. And after I was diagnosed, I could not run for a while. I stopped, for instance, like right before my diagnosis, I was skating a lot. So as you could imagine, that's something I shouldn't really do anymore for obvious reasons. So like little things like that. I really shouldn't get on boats because obviously like that could trigger some serious dizziness, like stuff like that, or skiing, like those are not things that I do on a regular basis anyway. But at the time, it did require some reframing. Also, for instance, like going to clubs or concerts, stuff like that, like where I'm exposed to really loud music. I need to be very careful with that. So now I carry earplugs around with me all the time. And I try to distance myself from situations that I know could be potentially triggering. So it really it builds some discipline, right? Like I take my health very seriously. I try to eat really well, try to rest. I do a lot of yoga. That has been one of the best remedies I've ever found. To be honest, it just kind of like, it helps you build that like body strength and that balance, right? Like it's just like, it helps me know my body better.
Yeah.
And it's very grounding in many ways. So yeah, it's been a journey, but here we are.
Thanks for sharing that. And it sounds like you are in tune with your body more.
Absolutely.
Right? Like it's like you're forced to listen to what your body needs and take care of it.
Absolutely. You know how like people always say you need to prioritize your health and stuff like that. And I feel, at least in my personal experience, I didn't really understand what that meant. until something serious happened.
Yeah.
And that's when you're, no, this is important. Before, I'm not going to lie, when I was working at New York One and before that, I will skip meals because it's just, you're just that busy, right? In a newsroom environment, there are a million things happening. You want to be a team player. You see everyone working extremely hard. Everyone is there 15 hours. You don't want to be the person slacking. So you forget about your health sometimes.
I say, so it sounds like, you don't prioritize yourself.
It's common to be in that hustle culture and common to be in these jobs where, like you said, to be the slacker, what's the slacker actually leaving at 5 p.m.? It is that work-life balance that it falls on us to do, right?
Yeah.
Like the bosses, the job's going to demand everything from us. They're going to, the last piece of juice that we have from the day, they're going to want it. But
right. And then the other thing too is that, frankly, now I don't care. If you think I'm a slacker, then you're free to think I'm a slacker. I know I'm doing good work. I know I'm performing and I'm delivering, but I am not going to put my health at risk. I'm just not willing to go there.
Right.
That's right.
It's ironic because, Dahlia, you drove me to the hospital when I had I don't know if you remember this. It's been a long time. My job pushed me into panic disorder. Basically, like I developed panic disorder and I started having really bad anxiety attacks out of nowhere, I guess, or panic attacks. And I thought I was dying and I made you drive me to the ER.
I thought it was like a heart attack or something was happening.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I'd never had anxiety in my entire life. But it was the same thing where I realized it was my job. And that it kind of hit me like a wall. Like I exercised a lot, but it was tough. So
it can be very serious, and it really does feel. I've had panic attacks before, and it really does feel like your life is about to end. So I completely understand what you mean.
But that wall of realizing I had to change my life was probably the hardest part of what I do here. So. That part I totally can understand. Well, really quick, I wanted to go over. We skipped our community agreements.
Thanks, Allie. I know. I was like.
And so I'm going to read through them really quick. And Monica, if you have any additional agreements you would like to add, I know we've already gotten started, but please feel free to do so.
Okay.
We have 7 in total, so I'll read through those. Our first one is that we're speaking in draft. Our thoughts don't have to be polished, knowing that we can go back to them and change our minds, and it's not a final draft. We assume everyone is doing their best, and we're not here to be right, but get it right, and be present. And actively listen to the other person and what they're saying. Number 5 is be mindful of speaking space and how much time we're taking up. That's for Dahlia and I, because you're our guest. So please take up all the time.
Oh no, please! I'm a talker, so please tell me what's going on.
We're talkers, so we gotta like share the space. So please, that's like for us. And then this is our number 6 is this is a space to learn and grow. Kind of, we can change as we go. Going back to that speaking and draft, and our most important is number 7 is to have fun.
Whoop whoop.
Woo woo is to have joy in the conversation. So
love these community agreements. I will add a little something to number 2. Assume everyone is doing their best. I will say also, remember that most people have good intentions.
Yes, it's very helpful. Sally's adding it in the moment. I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
I love it.
And I'm gonna keep us moving then. Monica, our next segue into you are a journalist. And so what first drew you to journalism?
What first drew me to journalism? I've always been very curious. And I've always wanted to know how things work or why things are the way they are. And I'm a book nerd. I love reading. And I've always, from a very young age, I knew instinctively that information really is power. Being informed is what, in many cases, allows you not to be manipulated by others. So,
exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
So all of that drew me to journalism, I think. This is a cliche in journalism, but I do think it applies. Journalism is the first draft of history, and there's something about that really attracts me.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
I mean, this is something like, if there are any listeners who are journalists, I'm sure you have heard this in journalism school. Journalism professors always say that journalism is the first draft of history. This is something I carry with me every day when I'm at work, and there's something unprecedented happening, and I'm like, wow, this is history being made right here, right now. Yeah.
And how it's written is how it's going to be remembered, right?
How it's going to be remembered, and then also the multiple ways that you can present the information, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then who were some of your mentors, or were there moments that validated your choice?
So I was thinking about it last night. I think the first person who told me that I should be a journalist was my history professor when I was in high school. We did this exercise. I want to say I was a junior in high school, maybe. And the history professor was trying to help us choose a major. And I mentioned a few. I said political science, journalism, I think, or psychology were the three I was debating. And he asked me to interview him.
Cool.
So we did a mock interview in front of the rest of the class, and we were sitting on this couch, and we were pretending to have microphones in front of us, and I interviewed him for 30 minutes. And after the interview was over, he said, "You're very good at this. You should obviously choose whatever you think is best for yourself, but if I were you, I will choose journalism. I think you will really thrive in that profession." So I was like, okay. He was my favorite professor at the time, so I was like, okay, if he's saying that, there might be something to it. And then in terms of mentors, I've been lucky to have wonderful mentors throughout my career. I will mention two that have been extremely pivotal in my career. The first one is Temis Brito. She was my supervisor at New York One when I was working on their Spanish language morning show. I worked with her for about 2 years, and she really embodies everything I want to be as a leader. She's just wonderful in every way. She's firm but fair. She works harder than everyone, has great ideas. So, yeah, I remember all her lessons every day. And then Juan Manuel Benitez, who is a wonderful political journalist here in New York. Now he is a professor at Columbia University. But before that, he was working at New York One as well. He was the host of Pura Política, a political show that I used to produce. So it was just the two of us producing the show for a couple of years as well. And he's really been there for me every step of the way. So, yeah, I really appreciate everything they've taught me and the support that they have given me.
Yeah, I feel like a good mentor can kind of make or break things for you,
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And it sounds like a lot of great experience, great mentors. Also, a lot of it focused on politics. So has it always been political for you? Or what was kind of the driving force to go in this route?
In a way, it has always been political for me. Even when I was in high school, my favorite subjects always had to do something. They always had to do with politics somehow. I remember we had to take some constitution class, and I really enjoyed it. I was the Colombian constitution, obviously, but I really enjoyed it. And then history, philosophy, those were the subjects that I really enjoyed when I was growing up. And then, but I really got into U.S. politics when I was finishing my master's. We had to do a mandatory summer internship from the second to the third semester. The program was 3 semesters long. In order to graduate, we had to do an internship. And I ended up doing my internship at Univision in Miami. And this was, mind you, this was summer of 2016. So peak 2016 presidential election. Yes.
Yep.
And I ended up working for the political team. at Univision. And that was a great experience. It was grueling, though. I'm not going to lie. I was working every day from 10 a.m. to sometimes 4 a.m.
Damn.
Nonstop.
Wow.
Yes. But it was the right experience at the time because it gave me the foundation for the rest of my career. And I will say, though, that I wish I knew then what I know now. It would have been much, much better and much easier for me because I really had to go from basically 0 to 100 very quickly. And just so you get an idea of the pace of the internship, my very first day was the morning after the Pulse shooting in Orlando. Yeah, it was a pretty busy summer for sure. But that's when I really got into U.S. politics. And I'm very glad I did because it's just fascinating in many ways. And I think growing up in Latin America, you are always aware of the gravitational pull that the U.S. has in the region. That's always something that I've kept in mind. So I really do think it's a great privilege to get to understand in a very deep way how the U.S. political system works.
Yeah. What a time to get involved. You're right.
What a time.
When you said summer 2016, at first it didn't click. And then I thought, oh, shit, that's right. Yeah.
It was, I got to cover the two conventions, the Republican and Democratic conventions 2016. Yes, that was quite an experience.
That has to be one of the craziest times to get to start.
Oh, absolutely.
In my opinion. Wow. And so then what keeps you engaged in covering political stories today? Although, I mean, I know we've kind of come full circle now, right? We're back into all of it.
I think it's just the significance of it. I think right now there are so many things happening and they are happening so quickly that I guess it's hard to keep perspective. But everything that is happening is important and is going to be consequential. It's already being consequential, but I don't know, 20 years from now when we look back at this time, we're just going to remember how consequential all of it is.
Yeah.
So I think that just keeps me focused and it's a good reminder of why we do what we do, right? Just like parsing through what sometimes feels like chaos, just because of the, if nothing else, because of the pace of the news, right?
Right.
Yeah, it makes me think of the podcast Pulso y Péndulo that you're a founder of. This was back in, was it 2022, 2023?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And we were speaking earlier about how similar the concepts of that particular podcast that you were doing was to like connect and to speak kind of through the truth through a lot of the misinformation that was happening back then. It's still very relevant now, right?
Oh, and it is more relevant than ever.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think with your podcast, you guys really got into specific politics and policies. And, you know, with ours, it's a little different because maybe sometimes we do go into specific policies, but it's more of, you know, as we mentioned, as it's in the name, navigating through these times, which is going to be really helpful to keep focus on everything that's going on. What has helped you keep focus? I know you mentioned before of like being informed when it comes to politics. What are some things that has helped you keep focused or keep centered when it comes to times like these where it feels really grave, right? Everything that's happening is really consequential.
I think sometimes like someone has to do it, right? Someone has to do this work. Someone has to keep their head down and just like keep digging, I guess. I've heard from a few friends and family that say, you know, it's just like there's so many things happening, I can't keep up. I've chosen not to pay attention to it anymore because it is overwhelming, and I completely understand where they're coming from. It really is overwhelming. sometimes I wish I could shut it down just because it's just like I said, it's just like, it's a lot of information just like coming at you from social media, from every corner, right?
Yeah.
And we all have TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. It's just a lot. It's you're constantly being bombarded by information.
Never ending, right? Sources
It's never
of information.
ending. It really is never ending. But I don't know. It's just interesting because my instinct is exactly the opposite. I want to know what's coming. Like I just want to know more. I want to know what's going to happen next. I want to know like what's the end of this story, right? So it's just funny how like different people process different things. But like for me, from a professional standpoint, I enjoy just like that there are things happening, right? Like that's what you want as a journalist, is like, okay, let's unpack this. Let's try to make sense of it. Let's break it down. Let's get the information that they need so that they can reach their own conclusions. Right? That's kind of in a very idealistic way what journalism is supposed to be. And I do believe that it can be that.
Yeah. You are a professional journalist. You have the experience, the credentials. How do you feel about these social media influencers or like political influencers?
How do I feel about them? I don't know. I'm a little torn, to be honest with you. On the one hand, I recognize that the way people consume media now is very different and we need to adapt. The reality is, yes, you can write the smartest, best researched 2,000-page article, but if you're not reaching people, then you are not achieving much. And I do think social media is a very powerful tool to reach reach the audience where they are. So I think that's very important. I also think there is something to communicating information in a simple way that is easy to digest and that is more democratic in many ways. I think that's the point of journalism, is just to allow a big number of people to... You want to reach the most people, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And social media is very helpful when it comes to that. On the other hand, social media moves extremely fast. And that is dangerous because if you want to stay relevant as an influencer or as a social media person, you need to constantly be publishing new content and be uploading new videos. And that doesn't necessarily lend to good journalistic practices, because if you're not doing your research, if you're not fact-checking the information, then we run into trouble. And then on top of that, unfortunately, the algorithm rewards sensational stories or sensational takes. So what comes to the surface is not always the most productive, right? So that's why I'm like, it has many benefits. I do think, I guess, traditional news organizations have a lot to learn from influencers in many ways, or we can adopt a lot of the tools or a lot of the methods. But we have to be very careful to still adhere to the core values of journalism, right? Like you need to fact check, and you need to be careful with the information that you present.
Well, now they're being invited into the White House.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. Oh, of course I've seen that. Yeah.
I want to go. I want to ask questions. I'm so invested in the community aspect that the politics never really clicked. I always knew it was there, but for me it was always, well, I want to show up and I want to do right by the community. But I want everybody to have like equal rights type of thing. And it's not really until recently until I'm like, okay, well, politics is everything. I was definitely the mindset where politicians are going to do their thing, almost like the vote doesn't matter. Things are going to stay corrupt. But now I'm turning and I'm really understanding that we do have the power. Our power is in our vote, right? In order to impact the community, we have to impact the policies that impact the community. I say all this for those who are listening, maybe weren't super inclined into politics right before, or doing the Monicas of the world.
The political nerds.
The political nerds, right? Like, I'm like a wannabe political nerd right now. Like, that's where I'm at.
It's that key saying. I hear this a lot. I don't do politics. And I do the biggest internal eye roll because I think everything is political.
Yeah.
You just either don't recognize it or you refuse to recognize it. You are engaging with it, and by not engaging with it, you're also engaging with it in some way. And so,
and I will add, you might think you're not engaging with it, but it is engaging with you.
Yes, exactly. So,
yeah. I have another question for you, Monica.
Yeah, of course.
So you're from Latin America. How does your lived experiences influence how you view the politics here in the United States versus like the politics in Colombia?
That's a good one. Well, I will start by saying that something that has been very interesting during my work as a journalist here in the U.S. is that even now, 14 years later, it is sometimes hard for me to see politics through the bipartisan lens, through the like Republican versus Democrat or Democrat versus Republican, because that's not really how politics work in Latin America or in Colombia specifically. There's multiple parties. Right. So sometimes here, when people say like, this is what Democrats are proposing, this is what Republicans are proposing, I have to remember, okay, like those are the two parties here, right? So like, I guess that divide, that is only two camps, it's very interesting from my perspective. And then from a more personal point of view, I will say I am very interested in the immigration system in the U.S., just like how it works or how it doesn't work, right? And how extremely complicated and disintegrated is what I want to say. It's just there's all these programs and visas and different requirements, and depending on what country you're from or the type of job you have, right? You're not going to meet two people who have the same immigration journey because of all those factors and how those factors play into the type of visas you can apply for or the type of protections you may or may not have, right? So I think I am just, from a journalistic perspective, I'm very interested in it. And it's also because it's one of those issues that I find fascinating in the sense that most people have a very strong opinion about it, either in favor or against it, but very few people actually understand how it works. So it's one of those issues, right, that is very divisive.
We're gonna have to bring you back on later so we can have a conversation about.
I was gonna say, it goes back to, like you said, you want to learn the why and how everything works.
Exactly.
So with it being so, it is complicated and it is different for everybody, and it almost feels impossible to make sense of at times.
And also the politics of it, right? It's just I find it sometimes frustrating that it is very difficult to make progress when it comes to immigration. It's very difficult to modernize the system in a way that will benefit the country and benefit migrants or potential migrants because of the politics of it. Because of if one party wants to achieve something, then they have to give certain concessions and they don't want to give those concessions to the other party. And then the end result is nothing happens. We're still stuck. Right? So I think it's one of the key issues right now.
Speaking of topics that are divisive, people have strong opinions. You being in the political sphere for so long, both seeing Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal being in those different spaces. Can you speak on how to approach conversations with people who have very different political views than you?
Oh, wow. Oof, that's difficult. Like, let's just start there. It's not easy. I will say the most important, I'm just going to go back to our community agreements, right? Assume everyone is doing their best and remember most people have good intentions, even if you don't agree with them. We all want, I don't want to say we all, most people want for society to be better, right? It's just we don't agree when it comes to how to get there. It's not that, for instance, it's not like conservatives don't care about poverty. It's that perhaps the way conservatives see things, they find solutions that are different than what liberals think. It's also not like liberals don't care about crime. Of course they do. Or of course, liberals do. But they have different tools, perhaps, that they think will help reduce crime in a way that is also more humane, right? It's just like, I think it's important to remember that. I think sometimes we think, oh, the other side just doesn't care about issue X. And it's not necessarily that. I will also say when we're approaching conversations with family members or friends or acquaintances about political issues and we don't agree with them, this is still a work in progress. It's not easy. I'm not perfect at it by any means. Sometimes after I have a conversation, I'm like, I wish I had approached it differently. But I think we all need to remember that we are also biased, right? Like, it's not only the other person. We also have our own biases.
Right.
And we might be wrong about certain things. Or maybe we're not wrong. Maybe we just didn't consider certain aspects of an issue, right? Maybe we just didn't see it from a certain perspective. And then I think I mentioned this before we started recording, but what I've noticed throughout my work, just like talking to people who have very different political ideologies or beliefs, right? Like, for instance, now I'm working for a more conservative-leaning publication. I've also worked for Democracy Now! I've been very lucky to just like be immersed in different publications, right? And with people who think very differently or want to present the information in a very different way. So that has given me a more global perspective. And what I have concluded after this professional experience is that at the end of the day, fundamental differences about political views or about what's happening on the news are not really about facts. They are about values. They are about what we prioritize, not about the information that you may or may not have. Sometimes when we're having a political discussion with someone that doesn't agree with us, we think it's a matter of just like giving them information that we might think they don't have. But they probably do have that information. They just interpret that information through a completely different lens.
Right. Yeah.
And that's okay. We just, sometimes it's a matter of accepting that and realizing that perhaps we're engaging in that conversation to gain some understanding, but we are not there to change their mind. If your goal is to change someone else's mind, you're going to be disappointed at the end because chances are you won't succeed.
I think that's a really important view because a lot of people, including myself, I'm guilty of it too, going into a conversation to change somebody's mind, which, like you said, it's not going to lead to the outcome that you're looking for. I would say maybe now for me going into a conversation, a successful conversation would now be being able to have one without it getting super heated. Me being able to say what I have to say and then them saying what they have to say and not turning into a fist fight.
I agree. Reaching that balance, right? I am going to stand my ground, but I can listen to you. I will make space for you. That doesn't mean I'm going to completely forget about my position, but I can listen to yours, right?
Yeah.
And to like you said, Dahlia, it doesn't become a fist fight. It's just like, okay, like we can talk about it. We can digest what the other person said. And then the other thing that it's important is, you don't always have to engage. If truly you feel like the conversation is not going to be productive, that it is like you see that the conversation is heading to a fist fight, then you just disengage. And you can say, you know what, maybe it's best if we don't talk about it, or we change the topic, or agree to disagree, right? Like you don't always have to have that conversation. Just like for your own mental health, right? It's not worth it.
Of course.
It's not worth it.
I love when when I'm clearly talking to somebody that's going in a completely different direction view-wise. I love asking questions, because usually they have maybe certain talking points that they're used to. But if you start asking a lot of open-ended questions, I feel like that can sometimes help us get to another stratosphere of talking about things differently. So I feel like that's been my method is instead of saying what I think, I try to ask them maybe a bigger picture question and kind of see where they're coming from. Does that make sense?
Staying curious. You're staying curious of why they're...
Yeah. And it's interesting because, I find that if I'm really not vibing with someone, I just start to ask them a lot of questions.
But that's good. Like it's good to ask questions. It's like Dahlia said, it shows that you are trying to understand, right? I think there is nothing that shuts a conversation faster than statements, right? Very direct, like definitive statements about like, this is how it is because blah, blah, blah. You're not opening the space for the other person. Whereas a question is the complete opposite, right? You are removing yourself and your personal opinions from the conversation, and you are allowing the other person to elaborate.
Yeah, exactly.
And I will add that it perhaps challenges the other person to really think about why they think what they think. Like if it is like a well thought out idea, or perhaps maybe they heard it somewhere, or maybe it's just like in their way, that's the way it is, but they just don't, they haven't really engaged with the position in a deeper level, right?
Yeah.
Tying back to Monica, what you said earlier about that people really go off of values versus off of like facts.
Yeah.
What feels right to them. This past week, I went to a Lectures on Tap. Have you heard of those events, Monica? They happen around here, around the city. So
no, I haven't.
It's a really cool concept. It's this husband and wife that started this past summer, where they host at bars or different places. A professor or an expert of something comes and speaks about a topic. And so the topic that I went to this past week was about the political polarization. And it is, let's see here, her name, Dr. Andrea Jones. She has a podcast, and she speaks about just like the data on politics. She spoke a lot about how in reality, people who have been voting from like 1960s to now hasn't changed too drastically. A few things that she mentions on how to engage with people in conversations, as well as like going to what we said, coming from a place of curiosity and speaking more about policies and issues versus like bringing up a person where it's like, like Obama was horrible.
Oh, that's good. That's
talking
good.
about issues versus people. But anyways, I think that's kind of what we've been speaking about here too, really aligns with how to move forward in a conversation.
I was just going to add, I guess just like remembering that we need to find common ground and in a way being willing to make concessions. Like in any right, ultimately a conversation with someone that you fundamentally disagree with is a negotiation, right? And in any negotiation, you're not going to get 100% of what you want. And if it is successful, the other person is also not going to get 100% of what you want, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But you are going to get some of what you want, and hopefully the other person does as well. But when a negotiation has completely failed is when both people feel like they got 0% of what they wanted, right? I think that's like, it's important to remember, and that's what is so frustrating sometimes about politics, is that you have to concede sometimes. You cannot be a purist. And I know that is difficult to accept as a concept. Like, even when we look at Congress, when we look at what's happening in just politics in general, it does feel like, oh, why are they doing that? Or why are they not doing that? It's like, you are, at the end of the day, you need to get certain votes, and you need to make sure that you get there somehow, right? And if you push too hard, unfortunately, you're not going to get the votes that you need. And then again, nothing happens. And that's not a better alternative.
Yeah.
I don't know, 51% is better than 0%.
Yeah. I don't know if Jane Goodall, the lady that she worked heavily with the gorillas in Africa and conservation. In her documentary, she talks about this a lot, that, there's all these large corporations and oil companies coming in, and they, of course, want this land. And she did major negotiating with them. And she said, people say, how can you work with these people? And she says, well, how can I not? Like, the other option is not, and nothing gets accomplished. So she kind of broke this groundwork of really working with them to get what she wants. But she did have to work with them. It was really interesting.
Right. And I'm sure it was probably very uncomfortable for her to have to do that. I mean, probably it was difficult because she had to go against her own principles and values and what she strongly believes in, right? But like you said, the alternative is then what? Then we're not protected at all. At least I want to have a seat at the table.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's never comfortable. That's the other thing. If you are too comfortable, then perhaps you're not doing things right. And I know that it's not a nice thing to say, but it is the truth.
I think that's really realistic.
It's very true. It's very true. I keep thinking of a conversation I had recently with, it's somebody, they definitely voted for Trump, and they stopped by and visited. It's been a while, but they live out of state. And so we saw them, and they were talking about how great it was with the MAHA, the Robert Kennedy movement of the kids with the
make
food
America healthy again.
Yeah. And they were like, isn't it so great that, the food dyes and the this and the that, and bettering, essentially what kids eat in kids' health was what he was talking about. And I said, yeah, but, Michelle Obama tried to do that too. And, people called her like a fascist. And so we had this back and forth, because she tried to address school lunches with kids.
Yes,
and
I remember
this big
all
controversy.
That.
Yeah. Like, oh my gosh, she's trying to control what our kids eat. And people were really offended and outraged. But anyways, in the end, though, it was just interesting. After that conversation, I thought, we both want the kids to eat healthy.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So I had an interesting kind of aha moment of okay, if we want the same things, so going back to that, most people mean well or have good intentions, but it goes back to the values, right? So
yeah, it's a fundamental disagreement of how we get from point A to point B. Yeah.
It's like it's the challenge of looking past one's own anger of how it's being worded to see the commonality between the two. Yeah. It's a work in progress.
A work in progress. That's for sure.
Monica, you've given us a lot of tips and things to think about, things to reflect on. We're Navigate the Now. We always root, reflect, and rise.
Root,
not
rise,
in that
reflect.
order, though. Okay, root, rise, reflect.
No, it's good.
That's our name. That's our name. But a big part of it is to reflect on our own actions, right? how we are coming to a conversation, what is our intention to get out of a conversation, and being realistic with ourselves.
I think that's key too, that final point, being realistic with ourselves and being pragmatic. I think, it's important.
Yeah.
Well, Monica, any upcoming projects or stories you're excited about?
I don't have any specific projects or stories in mind right now, but I guess curious to see what happens in the next 3 to 6 months in the US, because, for instance, the trade war with China, let's see how that develops. That's going to be a huge story for sure. Just like how the economy develops. I think that in particular is going to be very consequential, just because that is the number one reason voters decided to put Trump back in the White House. It's economic uncertainty, inflation. The majority of voters determined that Trump was the better person, the better candidate to handle all of that. So depending on what happens with these tariffs and with this trade war with China, we'll see where we are at as a country 6 months from now. And then depending on that, if voters still trust Trump when it comes to the economy, or if that starts to change. I think it's already changing a little, but we haven't really seen the full consequences of the trade policies of the Trump administration. So I think that's something that I definitely want to keep an eye on. Throughout the rest of this year.
We'll see what happens.
Yes, exactly.
I'm going to go to Monica and be like, can you break down the news for me? Because
I will do my best.
You'll do your best. Well, you do an excellent job. The first time I met Monica, we were at our friend's house, and we just ended up getting into this deep conversation about life, about politics, and I was just in awe with the wealth and knowledge Monica was just spewing out. And I always learned something from you. So,
oh, thank you. Yeah, I really enjoy our conversation, our deep dives.
I love it. More deep dives to come.
Absolutely.
I'm going to speak for Allie and I. We'd love to have you back at some point on the podcast to talk about other things.
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah. Well, it's been super awesome to have you on.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I really enjoy this conversation.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much. Yeah. It's been great. You're our first guest. So happy to have you on. Looking forward to having you again. If people want to reach out or communicate with you, are you open to that? Is there any place where people can find you?
Of course. I think the easiest way to find me, honestly, is on Instagram. And I'm constantly on Instagram, more than I would like to admit. So I think that's the easiest way to find me. You can find me on Instagram at Mónica Espitia. That's my handle.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we will link it down below.
And then if you are interested in political analysis, political discussions, maybe if you are open to multiple perspectives, you can also listen to the podcast I produce for the Wall Street Journal. The daily podcast is called The Potomac Watch. It's sort of like a deep dive into the biggest political news of the day. Usually 3 hosts analyzing different aspects of whatever is happening that day. It's an interesting conversation as well.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to start following and listening.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that wraps up our episode number 5. Can't believe it.
That's right. I know.
Thank you to our listeners for listening. Let's keep the conversations flowing. You can reach us at navigatethenow@gmail.com. We have our Instagram as well. So let's stay connected.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.
Thank you all.